There are moments in life that strike like lightning, quick, bright, and forever altering the landscape of your memory. The one I remember first is the slap. Not the kind drama writes for shock value, but the casual, contemptuous slice of a palm that said more than words ever could. You are nothing here. It happened on a bright autumn morning, outside the county courthouse. People were moving in and out like tides, all business and small talk. I was there for something I thought my years of quiet had earned me, to claim what family and the law had once allowed me to keep. Instead, I left the courthouse that day with a burning mark on my face and a different kind of bruise on my heart. My name is Margaret Hale. I am 71 years old. I was born to people who taught me dignity, raised by a mother who stitched kindness into everything she did, and married to a man who thought the world fairer than it usually was. For 40 years, I taught middle school English. For 10 years after retirement, I volunteered at the legal aid clinic. For 20 of those years, I served as a community mediator, settling fights over fences and dog food with a steady voice and a stronger patience. I never expected to be judged by a younger generation for the sins I had not committed. I never expected to be dismissed. But here I was. My son's wife, short, precise, and prettily merciless, had just slapped me as if swatting a stray fly. Her name is Alicia. She's beautiful the way a carefully placed photograph is beautiful. Her smile is calibrated for effect. Her irritation is practiced. "It's nothing," she said loudly afterwards, as if announcing a canceled appointment, as she smoothed her dress and turned to the cluster of onlookers. My son Daniel, who had been raised with the same hands that guided me through his childhood, stood frozen with the same uneasy look I had watched on him since adolescence. He did not push Alicia away. He did not take my hand. He allowed her theatrics to form the narrative. The first pulse of shock is cold, then heat, then a peculiar steadiness. I felt each in turn. I felt the sting on my cheek, but I felt something else beneath. Recognition. I knew indignity. I had seen it in the eyes of students whose lunch money was stolen, in clients who were gaslit by systems that were supposed to protect them. I had seen how the world could be made small for someone who refused to bow. I did not slap back. I had the restraint that only age and practice give. Instead, I smiled. The kind of smile that contains a warning and a history. For many, the old are invisible. For others, we are the last inconvenient truth. I wanted Alicia to know I was neither invisible nor powerless. Later that day, a woman I had once tutored in dispute resolution called and said, "Margaret, I'm so sorry." A neighbor stopped by with apple pie. A clerk emailed, cautiously sympathetic. People offered comfort in soft ways. But that afternoon, I sat in my kitchen and looked at my reflection in the window and thought about the life that had been quietly taken from me, one slow acquiescence at a time. You must understand something. The slap did not create the fault line in my family. It only revealed it. The fissure had been growing for years, measured in absences and excuses and the tiny disregard of a promise. The slap was simply a gesture that exposed a truth I had been trying to deny, that my son had been pulled away from me, not by distance alone, but by someone who knew exactly how to make him forget where he was from. People asked later if I felt angry. I will tell you this. Anger has its place, but it is not always useful. For me, the moment begged for action more than rhetoric. I am an old woman, yes, but I was not a helpless one. If I had learned anything in the small courtrooms and community halls where I spent my life, it was how to assemble facts, how to remain calm, and how to let the truth do the work. So I began, quietly, to collect the papers that would tell a different story. The theft was subtle. It was not a dramatic evicting with a bulldozer at dawn. It was paper, signatures, and the polite voice of a realtor over the phone. My husband, Thomas, had died 5 years ago. He and I had built our house together, small but honest. He planted the pear tree by the back step. I painted the kitchen cupboard that always chipped at the same corner because Thomas banged his mug there. After his passing, our son Daniel, my boy who learned to make the perfect pancake with me, moved back in for a while. He and his wife Alicia came and went. At first, the newness of marriage softened him into sweetness. He made me coffee at dawn and returned my calls. But love has many stages, and not all of them are kind to the past. It began with small requests. Would you mind signing this for the bank, Mom? It's just a form. Another, we'll handle the paperwork for the house taxes, Mom. It'll be easier for you. I signed the forms because what elderly mother refuses her adult son? I signed because I wanted to be helpful. I signed because I trusted. Then one morning, the mail brought an envelope I had not expected. It was formal, embossed, and stamped. It said, in the official tones that make old women trust sitting rooms and signatures, that a change of ownership had been recorded. I read the words twice. My name was no longer on the top line. My heart was a small and stubborn drum. I remember standing in the hallway with the letter trembling in my hand, my muscles refusing instruction. How could this be? I called Daniel. He answered with the quickness of someone who had rehearsed a reply. Oh, Mom, it's just paperwork. They needed to clear the title. You'll be fine. We're just taking care of it for you. His voice had the frictionless tone of someone who had practiced care into convenience. But when I pressed for details, he grew distant. In time, I learned how that distance was created. A mother-in-law coached to dormancy. A man who wanted so badly to be accepted by his new family that he surrendered what was his by birth. When I confronted Alicia, she smiled. A smile so clean, it almost smiled without teeth. Margaret, we're only trying to keep things tidy. You're older now. You should be living somewhere simpler. Her words were a soft murder. It's astonishing how the mind will dress danger as practicality. I sought counsel. Mr. Hargrove, an old colleague, walked through my living room, careful in his steps as a man who knows where soft things live. He read the papers, frowned, and said, "This is coercion, at least. There are signatures that should not be there, and you must consider this elder abuse." Elder abuse. The label felt like an indignity and an honor at the same time. It confirmed truth and drew a line. We filed a claim. I made the decision to bring the issue to court not for vengeance, but for restoration. The house was not only walls and shingles, it was archives of a life. My husband's handwriting was in the margins of the cookbook we used to laugh over. My son had carved his initials on the porch rail as a boy. Those things were not for sale or transfer. When I filed, something peculiar happened. Daniel grew more distant. If I had thought he had been distant before, I had not yet understood the depth of the river he had crossed. He avoided family dinners, took calls in other rooms, and when he did speak, used a tone that sounded like composition, as if he was reading lines rather than feeling conversation. People say the legal process is slow. They say the wheels of justice grind. I can attest that the grinding is true, but it's not that the wheel grinds slowly because the law is lazy. It grinds slowly because it weighs more than a single family's greed. Paperwork proliferates. Witnesses step back. Someone always wants to negotiate. In this case, the negotiation was a kind of exorcism. Remove the truth, and you remove the witness.
But we did not allow that. We kept records, we called witnesses, and slowly, through polite subpoenas and the dull, pragmatic reading of ink, we began to assemble a portrait of coercion. I learned things I did not want to learn about tactics used to isolate older people, about the way familiarity can be weaponized when the aggressor speaks gently while the victim is gaslit into confusion. And through it all, there was the ache of watching my son change into a man who defended his wife against his mother. But the most painful moments were not the arguments. They were the small betrayals. The missed holidays, the reworded condolences, the intangible rearrangement of our history into someone else's nice resume. I would remember his voice the way a mother remembers the cadence of a lullaby, always a little off now, a transposed note in a familiar song. I do not write this to make you pity me. I write it because the slow theft of a life happens to good people under polite roofs. I write it so that the next person who hears a mother's puzzled question about a simple signature will not shrug and say, "It's nothing." There is nothing small about paper that takes a life.
People imagine courtrooms as austere temples where truth wears a robe and speaks. In my life, courtrooms have been places where ordinary people learn how complicated justice can be. On the day the case went to trial, the courthouse smelled of coffee and paper and nervous perfume. I felt both young and ancient in that room. Young because the fight felt urgent, ancient because I knew how to sit in silence when evidence did its work. Alicia arrived with Daniel at her side, like an eager actress with her leading man. She wore a dress of precise cuts, braces that hinted at polish and strategy. She wore a smile that did not touch her eyes. The look she gave me was almost giddy, as though she expected the entire affair to be a social spectacle, a fashion show where the older woman had been miscast. Her lawyer spoke eloquently. He used soft words. "Mrs. Hale is being difficult," he suggested to the judge, "and Mr. and Mrs. Emerson are simply making provisions." He meant to paint the issue as a domestic squabble dressed up in legalese. For many in the courtroom, it was probably just that, another dusty family drama. I sat quietly. I had my binder filled with letters, the notarized papers that contradicted the ones Alicia presented, and photographs. I had pieces of evidence stitched together like a quilt of proof. The bank statements with suspicious transfers, the notary that did not match the state file, a neighbor's testimony about witness pressure, and most piercing of all, the recorded phone calls in which Alicia asked Daniel to make sure Mother signs it before she changes her mind. When the prosecution, our side, laid out the pattern, the room changed. Documents were placed before the judge like flags, signaling a story. The judge listened in that weighty way judges do, not with emotion, but with a patient scrutiny that is sometimes the only shelter against manufactured certainties. Then the moment any writer dreams of came. A witness we had quietly located weeks earlier entered, an elderly woman who had been a notary in our town for 40 years. She came in with an old cardigan and a cane, and the kind of eyes that see more than they say. When asked to verify Alicia's witness, she paled. "That signature is not familiar," she said simply. "It does not match our stamped entries." At that, Alicia's smile slipped. Her lawyer tried to wave it away as an oversight. But patterns are not made of single threads. The evidence began to create a weave. A notary signature that did not match the stamps. Bank withdrawals made the day after we had been invited to a family meeting. The realtor's email with instructions that did not correspond to the timeline they had offered. There was a moment when I looked at my son and did not see confusion. I saw the dull mask of defense. I understood then that the force that had taken him was not solely Alicia. It was a cultivated indifference, layered with approval. He was afraid, and fear can make men do foolish things. The prosecution asked questions that mattered. They did not scream, they did not brandish old wounds for applause. They simply placed the truth carefully on the table. The truth, when given space, tends to breathe. It expands until it's seen. When cross-examination turned to Alicia, she faltered.
"You should have let us handle it," she told the judge in a shaky voice. "We were helping her." Her hands were not steady when she reached for her glass of water. My son made no move to comfort her. Perhaps his heart was beginning to catch up to his actions. At trial's close, the judge set a date for a preliminary ruling. The media came like flies to light. Small local papers, blogs that loved a domestic drama. I refused to let the spectacle pull at me. I had never needed headlines to know my worth, yet I admit the whispers stung. People's pity is a thin and silly thing when it's all you have. After the court adjourned for the day, as people filed out into the afternoon, Alicia stepped forward. She faced me with a face that tried to be matter-of-fact and instead emitted contempt. "You're making this personal. You're trying to terrorize my family." I kept my voice steady. I'm trying to get what is mine, and I'm trying to protect others from the same thing. She smirked and, without warning, struck me. It was a fast motion, not premeditated perhaps, but meant to puncture me. The slap landed on my cheek like an exclamation point at the end of a sentence I had never written. My first impulse was dumb outrage. How dare she? The second was the quiet, fatal understanding that this slap had given me something I had been denied for months, proof of the character who hid behind a smile. It was evidence stamped in fury. The security officer moved to intervene. Daniel stood with his head bowed as if to avoid the cameras. People clustered like bees around broken glass, eyes wide, voices sharp. But inside me, there was a steadiness. I had been struck, yes, but what I had gained was larger. The exposure. She had shown exactly what she was. I could have called the police then. I could have yelled. I could have done 1,000 things that would have made the moment uncomfortable for the sake of dramatic justice. But I had been to too many courtrooms to mistake the moment's heat for the slow work that makes justice stick. I walked inside, and I sat down, and I did what I had always taught my students to do. I let the record speak.
People who have never set foot on a bench imagine it as a place of power, a dramatic chair that creates judgment with a tap of a gavel. They do not see the loneliness of it, the responsibility, the burden of knowing that decisions you make will ripple into lives. For me, the bench has always been a place of duty, not triumph. It's where I learned that mercy and firmness are the same coin observed from different angles. On a day that felt ordinary, the court's schedule shifted. The presiding judge was called away on an emergency, and the senior substitute, the one who covers hearings at short notice, was asked to preside. By coincidence, and perhaps by providence, my name was on the list of eligible substitutes. I had not requested it. The court had simply moved to fill a vacancy with an experienced volunteer. When the clerk called the courtroom to order, someone in the back muttered my name, and the hush that followed felt like cold water. I rose, nearly surprised by my own movement. Some of the room laughed, stunned, then quieted. Alicia's face went white. Daniel's jaw clenched. Even the reporter who had been waiting for sound put away the tiny boom mic of gossip and looked up. There's a peculiarity when you have known a family for years. You see its bones. I had seen this family's laughter at picnics, their holiday dinners with too many pies, the tenderness at funerals. Standing in that judge's chair, looking at Alicia, looking at my son, I felt the strange compression of all those years into one present second. I did something simple. I asked for the record. I asked for the papers to be reviewed again. I asked for silence. The clack of the court reporter's keys and the low murmur of legal counsel filled the space, creating a rhythm that steadied my voice. "Counselors," I began, calm and precise, "we will proceed with decorum. Counsel for the plaintiff, present your arguments." As I listened, I did not let my personal stake blur the line. Judges must not be personal. But this is the odd generosity of justice. When one has been wronged and then presides over the arena, one can see both the hurt and the law's architecture.
The law asks for fairness, not theatrical revenge. When Alicia's lawyer advanced his points, claims of voluntary signing, of modernization and doing what's best for an elderly mother, I allowed them to speak. Then we played the tapes. The recorded conversations where Alicia asked Daniel to make sure Mom signs today were played. The notary's contradictory testimony was read aloud. The neighbor's affidavit about pressure was submitted. Evidence does not always move quickly, but when it aligns the way pieces of a puzzle click, it lights up an unmistakable pattern. There was a moment when I turned my eyes to Daniel. He sat there, shoulders tight, as if braced against a storm he had helped call. His voice, when it eventually emerged, was small, but honest in a way that moved me. "Mom," he said, almost to himself, "I didn't want to see how far she would go." People say forgiveness is a generous act. Forgiveness is also a practical one. It releases you from the weight of nursing a grievance. As a judge and as a mother, I had to be clear. This courtroom needed to restore what the law protected, not to orchestrate retribution. So I ruled with what the evidence allowed. I issued immediate injunctions to restore title to me, pending full trial, and directed the bank to freeze suspicious transfers. I ordered Alicia to have no contact with any witnesses and to refrain from entering the property pending proceedings. When the clerk read the orders, Alicia's face crumpled in a way that was not theatrical. Daniel's eyes watered and he reached for his head as if to shake out the sleepwalk he had been living. Outside the court, people said I had used the bench to teach a private lesson. That was a misreading, though I cannot deny pleasure in the clarity of order. I used the bench because it was the place where law and life intersected cleanly. I did not gloat. I simply did what was lawful and necessary, for the record, for the house, and for my own sense of dignity. I have sat in many places of authority in my life, but that afternoon the chair felt like a bridge. It was a bridge between a woman nearly broken by small cruelties and the formal mechanisms that restore rights. I did not need to be cruel in return. The law is patient when given evidence. That patience itself is a kind of power. When it was over, when the clerk read the orders and the gavel, my gavel for that day, sounded, I felt a calm so deep I almost laughed. Those who saw the slap had seen the immediate drama. Those in the court had seen the slow accumulation of acts. Both are truths. Both are parts of a life. My son came up to me after the hearing. He took my hand, and in that simple touch, I felt a child again. He did not speak at first. Then he said, a voice cracked and tender, "I am sorry, Mom." There are sentences that build back things. That was one of them. It was not enough to erase the past months, but it was a necessary stitch.
Justice does not always look like headline victories. Often it looks like paperwork and repairs and slow reconnection. The orders I issued were only the beginning of rebuilding what had been broken. I did not revel in Alicia's humiliation. I set a process in motion where accountability could have its chance. Alicia contested the orders. She contested them with lawyers and with lacquered statements in the local paper about misunderstanding and family complexities. But legal proceedings run on facts, and facts, being patient and persistent, accumulated. Witness testimony, bank forensics, and notarized contradictions gathered until the narrative she had constructed frayed. People do not always want to hear that the woman next door can be ruthless. It is more pleasing to assume the worst belongs to someone else's neighborhood. Daniel, to his credit, did what many men in his position would not. He untangled himself. It was not instant. It was messy and painful. He had to confront his complicity, his cowardice, and the small betrayals he had normalized. I watched him submit to humiliation with what I can only call the courage of starting over. He apologized publicly and privately, and he accepted counseling.
He set about learning to identify manipulation and to rebuild trust in his own judgment. When the final judgment came, the court affirmed the injunction with additional sanctions against Alicia for falsifying documents and coercing a vulnerable adult. The legal language was dry, but the consequences were not. Alicia paid fines, attorney's fees, and was ordered to provide restitution. The house title was restored to me. Most importantly, measures were put in place to protect others. A local elder advocacy group received the evidence and began outreach to ensure neighbors would know their rights. People asked if I felt vindicated. Vindication is a small, shallow thing compared to the larger work of healing. What I felt was steadiness. I had been gaslit and pushed aside. I had been slapped in public. I had been forced to defend my memory and my rights. And the law, cumbersome, slow, human, had answered. That mattered. Not for the applause, but because it reinforced the truth. The past cannot always be rewritten through charm and malice. Daniel moved out of the house he had shared with Alicia. He slept under my roof for a time, then took a small apartment. He started groups and therapy, and worked to reconnect with friends he had abandoned. The boy who once read late into the night and hummed while cooking returned, slowly. He did not return whole at once. He returned in pieces assembled with intention. I kept something else, the safety deposit envelope I had prepared before everything blew up. In it, I had placed the compilation of witness statements, photographs, and notes, a seed planted in case the world needed proof. I had meant it to be a thread back to truth for my son in the future. When he stumbled into my kitchen one evening, shame heavy on his shoulders, he found that envelope waiting, as quietly as a parent's infinite patience. He asked if he could open it. He read. He cried. Then he put his head in his hands and said, "How did I not see it?" I told him, "You were being loved in a way that made you small. Sometimes people love you by taking away your choices and calling it care." We did not speak ill of Alicia beyond the facts. There is a coldness to gloating that I do not tolerate. When someone is judged, the act of condemnation in the public square does not heal, it only polishes the anger. What healed my son more than my words was his own restored agency. We came back to small things. We cooked Sunday dinners together. We painted the hallway a color we both liked. We went to church, then to the park, then to the thrift store on Thursdays where we bickered over the merits of mismatched plates. There is a tender ordinariness in mending relationships that the grand gestures cannot replicate. As for Alicia, life rearranged in ways that sometimes look like poetic justice and sometimes like quiet consequence. She faced the legal penalties and then the social consequences, the kind that sting because they come with knowledge instead of spectacle. When she returned to the neighborhood, quieter, she lived with something I do not relish witnessing, the shrinkage of a life that had expanded on the credulity of others. That was not my joy. I did not relish her loss. I took no pleasure in small humiliations. My satisfaction came from the restoration of dignity, not the collapse of a person. A few months after the conclusion, my son thanked me with a kind of gratitude that was both remorseful and hopeful. "You didn't just fight for the house, Mom," he said simply. "You fought for me to remember who I am." I heard those words and felt their weight. A mother's job is not to control, but to be a harbor. Sometimes that harbor is silent and still. Sometimes it is a lighthouse in a storm. I did not always know the right way to be. I made mistakes too. But when the night is darkest, a parent's constancy can be the thing that helps a child find his way back. Now when I sit in the garden that Thomas and I planted, when the pear tree bends under its fruit in late summer, I think about what it means to grow old with dignity. It means to insist on a life that honors your own history. It means to hold boundaries and to forgive the shy, fragile attempts to return. If any lesson from this is worth sharing, it is this: do not mistake silence for consent, nor kindness for weakness. The world may move quickly to place labels like difficult on those who protect themselves. Protecting oneself sometimes looks like stubbornness and sometimes like legal paperwork. Both are legitimate. And for those whose mothers or grandmothers seem unreasonably insistent, listen. Listen before you make a life decision that erases the people who built the path you walk on. People who love you do not ask you to abandon your past. They make space for it. I have kept the gavel I used that day in a drawer wrapped in the same cloth Thomas used to polish his watch. It is not a trophy. It is a reminder, not of victory over a person, but of the restoration of balance. We are not defined by the slaps we receive, but what we build in the aftermath. I sat in a judge's chair, and I ruled like a person who has known the weight of both mercy and truth. I did not set out to teach a bitter lesson. I set out to restore what was right. And when my son and I stand together now, preparing pie and laughing over the silliest things, I know that justice had a role, but so did steadfast love. The courthouse does not hold all truth. Families do. Law can restore a deed and protect a roof, but it is compassion and patience that teach a man how to come back home. If someday you find yourself on the steps of a courthouse or in a kitchen with an envelope that says, "The truth," do not be ashamed to open it. The truth has a way of finding light, and when it does, it teaches us what we were too afraid to see.